Some games have beauty in their simplicity. Some of them are just so simple they suck. But simple isn't the word of the day. It's quite the opposite. Today we're talking about advanced, complicated, perhaps even convoluted. Hi folks, it's Falcon, and today on gameranx, the 10 most complex games ever made. We're starting off today with the classic Microsoft Flight Simulator. There are games that are simple, there are games that are extremely complex, and then you've got Microsoft Flight Simulator, a game that's either brain-dead simple or impossibly complex. This thing lets you tweak settings and turn on assists to your heart's content. So if you're a casual player who wants to jump into the air and do some virtual tourism, that's an option. And if you want to experience what actually flying an airplane is like, at least as close as possible, using whatever control configuration you have, you can do that. Just turn off all the limiters and jump off the deep end like the absolute psycho you are. There is a complex physics model that dictates how planes are able to fly at all, and it's all working in the background where you're free to either engage with it or ignore it completely. For the real hardcore flight enthusiasts, there are PMDG aircraft, which are realistically modeled, and just starting them up requires an extensive tutorial. Most in-game aircraft have fully modeled cockpits with every switch and button that they'd have in real life, along with their real-life functions. With a tiny Cessna, it's not hard to suss out what all those buttons do, but when you jump up to the jumbo jet, wow, let's just say I don't know what I'm doing. I mean, I kind of know what I'm doing, but I shouldn't be in a real one at all. There are people who do fly in this game and learn how to fly and become pilots. I am not going to be one of them. The fact that that's even possible is due to just how much stuff there is, though. There's like a flight computer that works exactly like a real one, and they're just as complex as the real thing. Compared to all other games appearing on this list, Microsoft Flight Simulator might look like a lightweight in the complexity department with some aspects of it. And yes, I am saying that a lot of games are more complicated than actually flying an aircraft. Like, I'm just going to be honest here. This list is going to be a lot of spreadsheets and rudimentary sprites. Like, complex games don't have the reputation for being the most visually appealing. It doesn't come from nowhere, so I just wanted to start the list with something you can, look at and actually have some idea what's going on from what you're seeing. Also, while we're talking about unintuitive flying games, let's not forget the Digital Combat Simulator, DCS for short, which is entirely missing the whole game part, and is just focused on the crazy workings of military aircraft. To get some of those things working, you actually have to spend time reading the real manuals for these aircrafts. Hours of YouTube tutorials are probably going to be necessary as well. Doesn't count toward actual hours flown, but man, pretty close to the real thing. Extremely close to the real thing in that I cannot operate any of the aircraft. I don't know if I need to know how to operate military aircraft, though. Now we're moving on to number 9, Noita. At first, this spelunky with magic roguelike doesn't seem that difficult to understand. It's got a big magic system similar to something like Magica, combined with the potential for cascade failures like spelunky. How complex could something like that really be? Well, as it turns out, extremely complex. Every pixel on the screen is simulated, from the water to the dirt to everything in between, and everything interacts with something else in sometimes very surprising ways. Heat makes water evaporate, which becomes fog, and that's how this complex simulation works at the most basic level. You play as a wizard who is able to use various wands that can drastically alter the environment, and it's the level of malleability that really makes this game impressive. You could do all sorts of crazy things with wands to terraform the world to your liking, or just blow it up if you want. Those are both options. It's not just fluids that compromise this complicated situation. Either animals are also a part of it. All this chaos can build up and lead to plenty of unexpected things. This has since been patched up, but it's a perfect example of how much is going on in the background in Noita. It used to be that the animals would create urine when they were damaged or frightened. The problem was that certain animals would urinate too much and create entire pools that they would end up drowning in. It's also Dwarf Fortress-like in its comic absurdity, and that's only scratching the surface. As far as roguelikes go, Noita is on a whole other level of complexity. There's just so many interlocking systems going on at once, and it can take absolute ages to understand how everything functions, if you end up understanding how everything functions. And number 8 is oxygen not included. In this game, complexity is, well, the game. It's a colony survival sim combined with a chemistry sandbox with thousands on top of thousands of ways to fail spectacularly. As it turns out, trying to survive in an enclosed environment in the depths of space can be kind of tricky. Your main concerns are, as you'd expect, getting enough oxygen and dealing with heat, of course, in oxygen not included. Heat is a huge issue, despite it not being in the title along with oxygen, but it's space, meaning there isn't any medium for conduction. Yes, it can travel through space as radiation, but heat doesn't have anywhere to go once it's just plain old heat. Too much heat and everything starts to fall apart. Your duplicates, or dupes as the game calls them, quickly fall into a cascade failure that's really difficult to get out of. And that's generally how games of oxygen not included end, with a spectacular failure. Just disposing of waste can be a massive headache because of the methane that's going to build up in the air. In general, gas buildup is always a serious issue in the game because only one type of gas can inhabit one square at a time. Not enough oxygen and your dupes will start to suffocate, which is the most common way these poor fools will die. Oxygen not included is one of those games that feels nearly impossible at first. At the start of any given game, it's pretty much the toughest part no matter what, but knowing a few tricks can make things significantly easier. Still, it only takes a little mistake for everything to fall apart, which could be frustrating as hell, but watching all your hard work collapse is actually part of the fun. Yes, truly. If you're playing the game, that's why. That's actually part of why. And number 7 is the Amazing Cultivation Simulator. Might just look like another colony simulation game, but it's so much more complicated than that. For one thing, not even the title is what it seems. Oh, Amazing Cultivation Simulator? So, like you're a farmer? No. They're talking about spiritual cultivation, with the ultimate goal being nothing less than enlightenment and eternal life. The actual meat and potatoes of the gameplay, you're trying to revive this sect that has fallen into ruin. Some of it can feel like RimWorld, where you're ordering your disciples around and building your sect, but with a lot more RPG elements and a whole lot more esoteric Eastern spiritualism that comes off as completely impenetrable if you're not already ingrained in that culture in some way. Like Feng Shui. The game wants you to build spaces that adhere to the principles of Feng Shui, which is probably a word you've heard a lot of. It's a cultural thing, been integrated into Western culture as just like arranging the room good. Oh, I like the Feng Shui in here. But if you're anything like me, you have no idea what Feng Shui actually entails. And brother, if you play this game, you're going to learn. And it is incredibly complicated. Every object has an elemental association. And depending on how you fill a room, it'll affect the auspiciousness of that place. Doors need to be in the right location. The room needs to be full but not crowded. And depending on the walls, floor, soil, and even the weather, it'll affect how good a room's Feng Shui is. I've read through multiple guides on this and I'm still scratching my head. The actual cultivation in Amazing Cultivation Simulator is also extremely complicated. It has a metric ton of stats, secret breakthroughs, special training methods, and something called secret body parts. I guess you can open a literal third eye. And, yeah, I understand that's part of, again, the Eastern spiritual culture, but let's just put it this way. All that stuff on its own is complex, but then you throw in the impenetrable UI, and that makes things even harder to understand. The sketchy translation doesn't help a lot either. There's so much more to this game than the stuff I'm describing. Your little dudes can go on quests, fight monsters, compete with other sects. It's a daunting game, but also pretty interesting if you're willing to jump into the deep end of Eastern mysticism. Just read a few guides, because the mandatory tutorial only scratches the surface. And to be frank, I played it for a few hours and I still don't know what I'm doing. It's not an easy one, but then none of these are they? That's kind of the point, right? And number 6 is Workers and Resources, Soviet Republic. Isn't it strange how games like SimCity or City Skylines, in these games, like you, the omniscient and all-powerful mayor, You basically do everything. Workers and Resources takes that idea and builds a factory with it. In a normal city builder, you're doing stuff a mayor would never do, like directly zoning districts, ordering roads to be built, placing hospitals or like public services and stuff, hooking up water, electricity, all that. But in those games, all you're really worrying about is location and money, and traffic if we're talking city skylines. In Workers and Resources, you're in charge of a glorious communist planned economy, so there's a reason you're doing everything. You're the planner. Get it? However, it's so much more complicated than SimCity. You don't just have the cash to worry about. You have resources that you need to build anything. Most of it needs to be homegrown. This aspect of the game turns it between a cross between a factory game and a city builder, and it gets really in depth. You're not just building factories, you do need to connect them up with conveyors so trucks can transport things around, and factories that depend on certain resources can collect what they need. Trucks aren't just things that appear automatically either. You have to build a motor pool, purchase individual vehicles like trucks and construction equipment, and keep them maintained. You even need gas for the vehicles. The simulation goes that deep. There's over 30 different resources you have to worry about, and using any given resource is rarely a simple process. Even doing something as basic as building a road is a logistical headache. You don't just need gravel, you need dump trucks and bulldozers, you need workers, you need a way for workers to get around. I'll give the game one thing, it does make you appreciate how difficult it actually is to build and maintain a city/factory. But would it hurt to delegate just a little bit? I mean, the Soviets weren't just having one guy figure every single possible thing out, you know? You ever looked into them? They didn't do it this way, let's just say. I mean, part of the fun is that it's this complicated, but still. At number 5 is Cataclysm: Dark Days Ahead. This open-world apocalypse roguelike isn't much to look at, but the complex nature of the simulation is fascinating. In most games of this type, inventory management is relatively simple. You have encumbrance or a limited number of inventory slots. In Dark Days Ahead, much more complicated. Obviously, that's what we're talking about today. You have a weight limit, but to hold things, you need pockets or backpacks, and these have their own limits that include an item's weight, which, yeah, is normal, but it's volume and length also, so no putting broadswords into your pants pocket in this game. Honestly, much more realistic than other games in that respect. Healing, also really complex. You can't just use a stim pack to recover your health. You have to use bandages and disinfectant to keep a wound from festering, and it'll take days to recover from damage. If you sustain a serious injury like a broken leg, the effects are significant worse. You have to use a splint. It takes over a month to heal. Yeah. It sucks. Taking serious damage doesn't just hurt you, it also increases your character's pain, and the more pain they're suffering, the more debilitated they are. The usual rules of zombie survival games are in effect here. You make a lot of noise like firing a gun and hordes will come looking for you. That means melee weapons are pretty essential for surviving early on, but getting a good one early is also fairly rare. You might find a katana or a broadsword in someone's house, but don't get excited just yet. Examine it to see if it's a replica sword or not. A fake sword falls apart after one swing, which makes sense, but as one of many ways, the early game here is full of opportunities to make mistakes and die prematurely. And number 4 is the Hearts of Iron series. When it comes to complexity, few games in the grand strategy genre match up to Paradox Software's stuff. From Europa Universalis to Crusader Kings, these games are highly detailed and extremely complex. What's notable about them is that unlike most strategy games, there's never actually a win condition. The main goal is just to play them and see what happens. This leads to the player making their own goals, like conquering Europe or starting as a backwards noble, scheming their way into ruling the entire kingdom, that kind of stuff, but the game doesn't actually care whether you win or lose. It's mostly interested in creating this massive and dynamic simulation where it's sometimes just as fun to lose as it is to win. The most recent Crusader Kings is probably their most beginner-friendly game, but the most complex in terms of simulation is either Hearts of Iron 3 or maybe one of the Victoria games like Victoria 2. Hearts of Iron 3 isn't necessarily the most difficult, but it has the most going on behind the scenes. Normally, you got a whole bunch of advisors to take care of, you know, like the daily business of running logistics of World War II. So your chosen leader can get into the nitty-gritty of actually fighting the war, but if you really want to give yourself a headache, you can turn off the assists and try to manage every aspect of your country single-handedly. Usually, this will end in disaster. Seriously, it's tough managing logistics of a single city and workers and resources, but in this game, you do that for a whole country. In Hearts of Iron 4, for example, supplies never just appear where you need them. They actually need to take a train and get distributed at supply hubs, which can be interfered with by enemy forces. You're not just directing the war effort, you can even dip into the design lab and build your own ships, tanks, and planes, all of which are extremely detailed, just like everything else in the game. It's not that hard to manage if you got all your advisors turned on. Most of the game's complexities can be hidden from the player, but that complexity is what makes these games so interesting as a simulation, and the what-if scenarios that result from that feels a little more plausible than what you'd see in maybe other games like this, because there's some kind of rationale behind everything that the game is doing. Well, most of the time. Just like in real-life history, sometimes people just do dumb things for no good reason, like, say, play Hearts of Iron with all the assists off. And number 3 is Children of a Dead Earth. This interesting but unfortunately abandoned space strategy game is complex in the usual ways these games can be, but with one added wrinkle. Unlike any other game set in space, which shows space combat as basically being World War II in space, they're usually Star Wars. This game actually realistically depicts how bodies move through the vacuum of space, and it's one of the most complex physics simulations ever attempted. It doesn't do atmospheric stuff like the Kerbal Space Program, but everything else about the simulation is much more complex and in-depth than even that game. They did their homework for this one, and they even cite actual scientific journals in-game to show their work. The sort of tricks you can pull off with spaceflight all sound like Greek to me, but apparently the game has a full in-body simulation. Like, they actually have the Lagrange point that you can slingshot around planets to gain speed using gravity assist. Basically, have you seen The Expanse? It's like that, but more complicated. It all sounds really interesting. It's really unfortunate that the game was never really finished. A lot of the planned editions never happened, but even in its incomplete state, it's still one of the most realistic space combat games out there. And number 2 is Dwarf Fortress. I mean, I could say what more is there to say about Dwarf Fortress, but I'm about to talk about it for a while, so something, obviously. It's a legendary game made by 2 madmen who wanted to make nothing less than the most complex simulation-heavy strategy game of all time. Every time I read something about this game, I find out new insane things that happen dynamically because of the complicated systems at work. You probably heard of the Drunk Cats event, where cats will walk around in taverns, get beer stuck on their paws, and then get drunk because they'd lick their paws, all of which happened organically through the complex simulation at work behind the scenes. They made beer that would spill, created small puddles which would stick to things that walked over them, and they made cats who would walk around and lick their paws, and they made it so that the game would recognize that the cats were coming into contact with alcohol and get drunk. There's so much going on at any given time that this sort of thing happens constantly. Like another famous patch note where they made the carp too hardcore by accident. What happened was that there was physical activity used to buff the physical stats. So carp were swimming around all the time, so they just naturally get extremely overpowered, and they were killing dwarves left and right. Dwarf Fortress is less of a game about actually doing anything and more of a story generation tool. There's always something unexpected and crazy happening because of the simulation. It's not a great game to look at, even with the Steam release that gave it actual graphics. They're still abstract and not a lot going on, you know, but at least the UI makes slightly more sense. The original version of the game was hard to tell what you were even looking at. You had to train your eye just to play the game because everything was ASCII art. It was basically so rudimentary that it was kind of like looking at the Matrix, which sounds very complex, and it is, but it also isn't. I mean, it still technically had a graphic interface. Now at least you can tell at a glance where a wall is, so you can spend less time trying to figure out what you're looking at and more time watching your dwarves become feral paranoid psychos, which is usually how any given game of Dwarf Fortress eventually ends. All your dwarves either get eaten by monsters or they go crazy from stress, or I don't know, you open up a lava vein by mistake and burn everyone alive. It's a game of chaos, but that chaos is made interesting by the extremely complicated systems that are going on behind the scenes. And finally, at number 1, Aurora 4X. This is the final boss of complexity, or as one Reddit user accurately stated, it's what the end goal of complex looks like. Aurora 4X is an ugly, extremely unintuitive game, but it's unimaginably complex. Originally created as a platform for space-based cooperative role-playing games, Aurora 4X is a sandbox empire builder where pretty much everything you can imagine is simulated. Ordering your ships around in most games involves clicking on your big blob of units. and ordering them to move. In this game, you have to assign all available posts, which serve different functions and affect how the fleet operates. Each specific part of the game isn't overwhelmingly complex, but when you take it all in with the size and scope of your space empire, it quickly at least feels completely unmanageable. I don't know, for me it probably actually is. I'm probably correct about that. But your economy can be completely left to the devices of the corporations in your simulation, or you can try to manage it all yourself. You can manage research, mining, industry, and logistics, make yourself sick dealing with every tiny minute detail of your universe-spanning empire, or you can let the AI do it. Either way, it's unbelievably complex, and it's not helped by the ugly visuals and frankly, spiteful UI. But if you love that kind of complex game where watching a 4-hour YouTube tutorial is the best way to get into it, hell, you've probably already dumped 1,000 hours into this thing. I don't need to tell you about it. And I got a bonus for you too, Minecraft mod packs. Let's end it with a quick shout out to these absolutely insane Minecraft mods that are so complex you need a graduate's degree in Minecraft studies to understand. I'm talking about stuff like Chromatic Craft, Rotary Craft, Thaumacraft, Nama Factory CEU, and especially Greg Tech New Horizons. That last one they call the 5,000 plus hour mod pack. And they are not joking about it. You can lose an entire lifetime to the complexities of this thing. I think it might be easier to build a nuclear power plant in real life than it is to build one on Greg Tech. At least in real life, a country isn't literally starting from square one. There are some crazy Minecraft mods, guys. Like the integrated dynamics mod, which is literally coding. It's writing code for Minecraft. The mod scene for Minecraft is absolutely wild. And that's all for today. Leave us a comment. Let us know what you think. If you like this video, click like. If you're not subscribed, now's a great time to do so. We upload brand new videos every day of the week. Best way to see them first is, of course, a subscription, so click subscribe. Don't forget to enable notifications. And as always, we thank you very much for watching this video. I'm Falcon. You can follow me on Twitter at Falcon Hero. We'll see you next time right here on gameranx.